Hi, this is singer-songwriter Elizabeth Edwards. Welcome to Giving Voice to Recovery, a place we share ideas and experience for the purpose of inspiring you on your recovery journey. I am so glad you've joined me for this series of conversations with my dear friend, Kristina Wandzilak. You may know Kristina from her book, The Lost Years, her work on TLC's groundbreaking show, Addicted, or her television docuseries, Codependent, which premiered on Lifetime and A&E. Kristina is credited with helping thousands of addicts and their families through her work as an international interventionist, and now joins me in a series of conversations about life, recovery, and coffee. Welcome to Coffee with Kristina. You and I are always trying to hook up, and we're both super busy, creative ladies doing our life in the work. And so this gives me like a regular excuse to hang out with you. So
sorry. I know I'm super excited about it. So thank you for having me.
I know, it's so funny because the minute I think we met each other, we just went, oh my God, like minds, like hearts, just coming from a lot of the same places.
Yeah.
And recognizing that there's a lot of people in the world that really, I think, my opinion, need to hear from people like us, moms, family members, recovered people ourselves, to know that people can and do recover. That is probably one of my biggest missions in life, is to really kind of help combat stigma around addiction and recovery. As a person in long-term recovery, I've respected your recovery for a long time, and I respect the work that you do with other people. So coffee with Kristina. Cheers.
Cheers. So happy to be
coffee drinking fools over here. But anyway, so my vision for this chat on a regular ongoing basis is for us to just kind of share some of the things that are coming up for us as recovered women, and how to, like, how are we doing life on life's terms? I mean, we're all coming out of COVID right now, trying to kind of figure that all out. Something that everyone's dealing with, but I think COVID caused a lot of break in people's, especially for people in early recovery. And it shows in the numbers, how many people relapsed and how many overdose deaths there were this year. There was a lot of evidence that these communities of early recovery and people struggling to grasp recovery were probably more affected than even some people in long-term recovery. And as a person, I've struggled with the isolation and also reintegrating back into in-person meetings after being vaccinated. So how are you doing all that? And what are you hearing?
So COVID, as we know, is, what I know about addiction is, the greatest medication for any human suffering really is community and connection, truth be told. Mm-hmm. So without that community and connection, people were dying alone in their homes, in their rooms, and people trying to get sober, incredibly difficult without that connection to meetings and in-person meetings, because without that community, people don't stay sober. That's the truth of it. Common denominator of long-term recovery, no matter where you find that support, right? Whether it's 12-step rooms or refuge recovery or Dharma punks or, wherever it is, you got to find like-minded people, right? Yoga, Hinduism. I have my clients find community in all sorts, Catholicism, Judaism, wherever you find it, it's so important. So when that was cut off, it's like a lifeline, truly, like an oxygen tank just cut in half. And watching people die, it was tragic. And as a woman in long-term recovery, personally, 28 years, I personally got sober in AA. And I went to meetings, for example, in the early part of my recovery every day, if not twice, if not 3 times a day. I went to a meeting every day for 7 years. So I don't know what I would have done, without it. And so even as a woman in long-term recovery, it was incredibly difficult to be disconnected. I learned a lot about Zoom, that's for sure.
Mhm.
I took a lot of hikes, 6 feet apart with friends and family. I think, I don't know, it was really difficult. I never had a time in my recovery, as neither of us have, I'm sure, where there was not access personally to that community. And then personally, yeah, it was hard, in hindsight now. Seems like COVID's been 7 years long. It was hard. And then, I worked the whole time. I did intervention, sometimes via Zoom, oddly. I did intervention, a lot of them outside. And then I also came to work at my sober living because it was on lockdown. And I came in masked and protected, but I just couldn't abandon the 18 people that I have here on
Yeah.
site. So maybe that helped me too, that although it wasn't the type of personal connection I used to fill myself, I don't consider, my work my personal recovery. I don't consider my work service necessarily, right? I think service is the art of self-sacrifice, but it was great to be around people and noise and community. So I feel really fortunate for that. And personal or professionally, what I see in my office now, I watch people crawl into my office these days as if they're coming home from war, right? It's been spiritual warfare for people. Some of them have lost everything, relationships, careers, money, their homes. It's so tragic.
There's so much in what you just said that I
I know it was a lot.
no, it was I was like, you're like preaching to the choir here, because I was like, oh my God, the walking helped me, because I had in addition to songwriting, I have always been fascinated with emotional sobriety. And a very dear friend of mine, another woman in long-term recovery, and I had started doing workshops right before, because I love language, and it's all about the use of language and recovery and how we can better talk to ourselves. So we had just launched this project, and so I had the booking set up going forward with that, and they were all in person, and so I had to move everything, including musical performances, which I didn't do a lot of online because I don't think it translates as well. Did a few of them, but for me, it was like my whole world just stopped, because I tend to go places and speak or sing or give a workshop or be involved in, kind of a face-to-face hands-on thing. So it was like, but what it did after I kind of got over the pity pot, I kind of went there. Mm-hmm. And I know to not stay there, but I still have to go there, to kind of find out what I need to do instead. And walking was one of them, because the gym is important to me. The weight came on, had to take that back off, still working at that a little bit, but a lot of the things everybody else is going through. And then, all the unrest between the way people felt about it, is like, I didn't want to get involved in that conversation. I respect people. I want them to, there's opinions out there, and it's like, it seemed like a big fight. And I thought, this is just a crazy time. And so one of the real joys I thought that came out of this was to start, I'd had the idea to start this podcast a while ago, and I'd had a bunch of, hurdles in the very beginning that kind of took me off my rails. And so when this shutdown happened, it allowed me to completely focus on getting this off the ground. And so I'm super excited about that. And I'm super excited that you'll be joining me on a regular basis with our cups of coffee. I'm calling it Coffee with Kristina, which is way fun. So we can talk about what challenges we face as women in long-term recovery, mothers, daughters, family members, and then also business women and people working with others who are looking for recovery, and just your take on stuff. So super excited about that. What did you find any new tools did you develop any new tools for your own personal toolbox during the COVID year and a half, 2 years here? Has there been new things that you've learned about yourself that you want to share?
Well, learned about myself. What I it's so interesting. And I'm not quite sure how to articulate this, but I've been sober 28 years. And sometimes, and it's interesting, right? In the beginning, sobrieties, it's not easy, but it's relatively simple. At least when I got sober, AA was, very simple. You just didn't drink, you didn't use, and you go to meetings. Mm-hmm. Get a sponsor with this. And it's interesting that with all my years sober, sometimes I have these, right? I mean, the truth is, if you're blessed enough to be sober long enough, life is going to happen. And every time I come up, sometimes when I've come up against profound and difficult times in my sobriety, it's amazing to me what I see is how quickly I resort to this thought that the basic principles of self-care will not apply because my problems are far too complicated today. So it's interesting how I can go there pretty quickly, like when my husband suicided or when this pandemic hit. I was thinking to myself, well, the simplicity of self-care, which is for me, prayer, exercise, connection, like I said, working with others, being of service in the form of self-sacrifice. Like none of that's going to work for me today. Like none of that's going to help losing a husband to suicide when my life was annihilated, or the pandemic and all access to people, places, right, and things, I suppose, was severed. That's like my default. Yeah. And so what I learned in the COVID, I always laugh when people call it that. What I learned in the pandemic, because it forced me to go back to those simple things, because I didn't have access to other things, right? Mm-hmm. Like therapists were offline. I mean, people finally got a hold of Zoom or whatever. AA meetings were absent until, of course, we got figured out how to do things online. Yeah. So I don't know. It forced me to go back to those total simple things where I didn't drink, I didn't use, I personally got on my knees every day, right? I reached out like old school, mm-hmm. right? To people, not like texting, but like
the phone,
right? Like reached out to my front row, right? Like those front row of women that have me no matter what, reach out to the front row. Like, I don't know. And I guess if nothing else, that's what I came through. But it's so interesting that the simplicity that got me sober is the same simplicity that keeps me sober. Yeah. And I guess that was a really great lesson. Once again, I was taught that after my husband died, and I was taught that again through pandemic. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's a great thing that I was reminded of.
I think the toolbox, we talked about the toolbox and recovery circles, and I'm sure they have another word for it. And some of the others, I'm a 12-step recovery person. And I always say, I belong to more than one program. I'm overqualified, but it was like staying in touch with people who, like what you're calling your front row, which I love that term. Actually, that's a great term. Yeah. I mean, I have a picture of myself and a couple of my front row gals, and we were on the ferry from Vallejo over to San Francisco. I live in the East Bay. We went over to San Francisco. We're masked up. The line, the tape that they cross the ferries off, like you can only sit one person every 20 feet type of thing. But we went straight up to the top, and I have this video of us totally masked. I mean, you couldn't recognize, sunglasses, hats, and we're going over to San Francisco. I can't remember. I think it was to celebrate. I actually just had a sobriety birthday. So that was pretty crazy. 30, God, is it 35 years? 35
That's amazing.
I know, crazy. So I have to check that. It's like, oh, that's so crazy. That is,
right? I know. I just celebrated 28 years, and it's amazing considering I didn't go to recovery to get sober. I mean, I didn't go to live sober.
Oh, me either. I was 25 years old. I was a Chico State student. My look good still looked really good. And I was like, oh, this is really great for these people. I can totally see why they need this. And the person I went with because I got a lot. I'm always I'm one of those helper people.
Right. You were getting someone else sober.
Yeah. And so a year later I came back and this is for me. So,
Yeah.
but that's part of my story. But the tools, I actually increased my, after feeling sorry for myself, getting angry, and I was the crazy woman talking to the TV, telling everybody what they should be doing, expressing my opinions that nobody wants to hear, and about things that we all have to figure out. And I was like, this is I've got to stop doing this, and I need to get back to basics. So same thing. I'm not I was really super agnostic when I got sober. I had a really hard time with anything like prayer or anything like that. But over the years, I had learned how important that spiritual connection is. And I had become a total seeker throughout my life. And I like love to learn about other people's religious beliefs, their not just religion, but spiritual beliefs, because I really believe it's all about a spiritual experience. For me, that's what got me sober, is that real shift, that real identity change inside. So important. That doesn't happen from the outside in. I believe that really happens from the inside and it comes out. And that's what happened for me. And so I had to get back to my basics. And one of the things I really benefited from it, I have a belief that I gained through my years of recovery. And that is, ask a better question and you'll get a better answer. If you keep asking really dumb questions, bad questions that are going to give me really negative answers, I'm going to still have that same life. So instead of saying, why does this always happen to me? Or why me? Basically, it's a big pity pot question. I started asking a long time ago, and I brought this big time into this time frame. What's good about this? Because if I can find that one good thing, I can get myself out of that thinking. Gratitude's so powerful, so important. It's most sincere form of prayer. And so that became my practice. And so I got into journaling, and I'm like full on fire again around all of that. So really looking at the way I talk to myself.
I so appreciate that you mentioned the spiritual process, Elizabeth, because when I got sober, I didn't believe in God. And I don't know if I do or don't. I think it's a term I use, just simply put. But I do believe in spiritual connection. I believe that, and I believe in living a life of service. I wake up every day and ask myself, how can I be of service? And do my best to interact in kind and loving and respectful ways. Certainly don't do that perfectly, but I know today I'm no more important or less important than the person next to me. And I believe in doing good. Yeah. Many, many years ago, a woman that I respect so much, she said, when I was telling her my thoughts on God, and she was like, I don't care. I don't care what your thoughts are on God. She said, you know what, Kristina, just go out and do good in the world, right? Go do good in the world and see what happens. That's spirituality. So I so appreciate you saying that. And the other thing I learned about the 12 steps, or my journey of recovery, right, where I found my recovery in the 12-step rooms. And by the way, the cool thing about being sober forever, right, in a spiritual journey is I don't think there isn't any 12-step room I haven't visited. Hinduism and, Buddhism and all, that's the journey, right? That I get to try all things, all different coats, right? Yeah, I feel like it's like trying on these spiritual coats, and it's like, wow, that feels good. And that works or that doesn't. But what I also realized, I thought I was on a mission or a journey somewhere, right? Like these steps were going to take me somewhere. And what I realized is that it was never about going somewhere, but the journey was home, right? The journey was home and healing myself and coming to terms with who I am so that I can be of better benefit to the world. And so when I got in the pandemic, that was the other thing that I realized, right? Like what I've learned is that I have to find God in every situation. Or in other words, I have to find the good in every situation, including my husband's suicide. And that took a long time. I went into spiritual warfare for 3 years. searching desperately for the good, right? Like I have to find the good or I succumb. And my husband's suicide taught me that in pandemic too, yeah, that I had to find the good in this or I was going to succumb to it, right? And the good sometimes at the end of the day is, right, like I can't say there's good in my husband's suicide per se, but at the bottom of the wreckage, what I found was an experience, right? An experience that I could use to serve others and to benefit the world, right? My little corner of the world that I could use his suicide to maybe save a life, right? That's the good. And with the pandemic, right? Searching for the good, which for me came down to simply connection, right? Truth is because we didn't have anything else, right? And like calling people. If you knew how socially awkward I was, like being around people is not my strong suit. It's not my strong suit, but I found myself thirsty for connection, right? And I figure if I was thirsty for connection, people were dying for it. Yeah. So it taught me, I don't know if that makes sense, but searching for the good, using that, the cool thing, not the cool thing, but the amazing thing about the pandemic is that it's a collective trauma. Yeah. Like we were all in it together. So that was cool. Like in the sense of even walking down the street or on a hike because I was desperate like you to just be outside, even like strangers, like, hey, right? Like I see you, right? I can't stand next to you. I can't touch you, but I see you. Yeah. Like that was the other thing that the pandemic taught me now that I'm thinking about it, right? I don't think I've ever looked at people in the eyes more than during this pandemic. And that's the other thing I learned. Yeah. Is that I can see people, but I don't know if I ever really saw them. Yeah. And I love that maybe about the pandemic. Sorry, it's getting me excited, but and now even in my work, honestly, like it's taught me to be more present. Yeah, like it's taught me to be more present because I realized what a large percentage of me that wasn't. And the pandemic, you know what I mean? Like it made you like connect. It made you connect instantly and quickly, like passersby, right? So
and two, just the value of those connections and the ones, and as a person who'd been established in their recovery, you and I probably had similar experiences. We had developed that front audience of people. Plus, we had come to that place, probably, I'm guessing I'm doing a mind read on you, but I suspect that, like myself, at early recovery, I had a hard time being alone with myself for any length of time. I did not like my own company. Right. So, I was super grateful that I'd gotten pretty good with my own company by that time. My thing was I had to stay out of wanting to stay there. I get very creative when I'm by myself for long periods of time. So I can get totally lost in flow. I mean, I've almost burnt my house down like 3 times trying to cook while I'm writing, but that doesn't work. So I stopped cooking. But anyway, that's actually true. It's not even a joke because I don't do jokes, but that's actually true. I don't cook very much. My husband's great about it. But the point is that what you're making is like when I'm out walking, it was like I could see in other people's eyes, people I would have probably looked at in the same way. It's kind of saying the same thing with eye contact is, wow, this is a really hard thing that everybody's going through. I think too, I don't know if you can relate to this, but I kind of thought, wow, people who are recovered, people who've recovered from such a hard problem, alcoholism, drug addiction, any kind of self-destructive addiction is self-destructive by its very nature. And when you've overcome that, I don't know about you, but I'm super good at, like, I can deal with crisis, but long-term stuff, whoa, I can do quick crisis. Yeah, really super good in a pinch. I can just come, but the long-term ongoing thing started to be, that's where. And so when you look at what, I'm like seeing these statistics about people, how many overdose deaths. I mean, we lost a lot of people that we're losing a lot of people to overdose anyway, with especially the opioid epidemic. And in the suicides, we never really know how many of those are drug related. That's a very hard number to get. But when you think about the lives lost during this time, it's just, we have a lot of recovery to do with families. We have a lot of outreach to do, and it's going to depend on the people, I think, who, like us, who have benefited from years of long-term stable sobriety. It's like, how do we take that to the people who, relapsed many times? I mean, I know you heard about them. I heard about them. I know you hear about them all the time because you work in that side of it. But it's just tragic to see that. What do we do?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It's a good question because, what I know about my work, now that people are coming in more and more, is it's so heavy these days, Elizabeth. It's like this collective grief.
Mm-hmm.
And the work is so heavy and people are so sad and tired and depleted. And like I said, men and women, families that have lost everything, children to addiction, certainly, but also COVID.
Yeah.
I had a family in here that lost 3 family members to COVID in a matter of like 6 hours, like that one of those stories, losing careers and lifetime of savings, and makes me emotional. It's incredibly heavy work. The other thing I realize, it's interesting, and it's interesting for healthcare providers and all sorts, is because this is a collective trauma. Yeah, it's interesting to be a healer of a trauma that is shared. So generally, right, healers teach and they guide and educate and
inspire,
heal. Yeah, exactly. And inspire. But it's an interesting time when the healers are suffering, right? Like the teachers.
Too, yeah.
Right, exactly. So I felt like I should do a study, or I wanted to research how the world recovered from other pandemics, because like, what do we do when the healers are in the game too, right? The healers are in the fight too. It becomes this equal struggle and trauma. Well, I don't know if I'm articulating that well, but that's what
I think you're bringing up a super good point. And I think it's like this. This is just kind of what I'm taking from what you're saying. I believe that the toolbox that we have as recovered people from addiction, I believe that toolbox can absolutely be applied to a lot of other places. Whenever somebody, regardless of what the challenge is, if it's grief from loss, from any kind of loss, a lot of loss, that's what we're dealing with. Loss and change, those are 2 really hard things. All human beings, they want change on their terms. Loss is hard even when you want the change that's going to bring the loss. That's even hard. But when you don't want the change that's bringing the loss, and you can't not, and it's going to happen anyway. How, as recovered people, we've had to overcome a lot of things. I think that can really, the light in your office is putting a ray on you. You look like an angel, my dear friend. Just want to tell you that. You are an angel. You're an angel. You're an angel in my world.
It is so pretty.
Isn't that pretty? Yeah. I love that.
Let me see if anyone posted a question. Oh, sorry. Go on.
Well, I think that we can take, hope. The principles of the 12 steps are so powerful when you actually think about them. The principle of the first step being the honesty and acceptance. And the second step came to believe a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So that is the principle of hope. And the principles are what stand through time. I think hope is an underutilized concept in the world itself. It's easy to cheapen hope and call people who provide hope as like a Pollyanna kind of person. It's easier to focus on the crisis, the pain. It's like clickbait on, people get paid to focus on the crisis and the pain. Then hope is underrated in the power that hope, and hope comes from example, not just words. It comes from example. It comes from people who have overcome things. We love the heroes in the world that overcome challenge, but people I think there's not enough people talking about the fact that we do recover. We do overcome grief. I mean, you lost your husband to suicide. I lost a brother to suicide. We've all, if you've been in the world of any kind of a family with any kind of addiction, you have had grief and you have had pain. We know this. Am I right? We know this. It's inescapable. It is a very painful family illness. So how do we take the hope and inspire others to look for solutions? Self-care, hugely important. Got to put your own oxygen mask on first. How do you do that? And it's contrary. It's counterintuitive a lot of times as a parent. So I think that's what I really want to continue having these conversations with you and invite people in to listen and send us questions so that we can kind of help guide that, the resources and the ways that people can do that, and to provide those examples of people that we know. What gives you hope today, Kristina?
Like you said, I think the most meaningful hope for me is watching, people get better. I think hope is, I agree with you. It's not just a belief. I think it's an action word, and watching people heal, come together. It's been really, like a renewed, it's just given me a whole renewed, faith and hope and inspiration for change, that people do persevere and they do come forward. Come through and get better. And that's been such an extraordinary thing to be a part of, to watch the redemption. I have a front row seat to watching people redeem themselves. And that has been an extraordinary way to spend a life. And through the pandemic, I feel like that's just tenfold, right? To watch people come in here and crawl and scrape and fight their way out. Mm-hmm. I do think hope is an action word. I do want to acknowledge also what you said about families. It's so counterintuitive to let go of the people that we love most, especially because sometimes they don't return. Mm-hmm. And you're right. It's so counterintuitive. Anyway, that struck me because I say that all the time with intervention.
Yeah. Well, and it really is. And I know that through your intervention work and through my advocacy work and my own personal experience around that is that there's a fine line. There's a fine line. It's like the butterfly, you hold it in your hand, right? If you hang on to it, you're going to crush the wings. But if you allow it to make its own choice, then most people will choose. If there's hope, I believe that recovery happens not just in addiction recovery, but recovery of all kinds, because the trauma of life is what leads to a lot of times into that addiction. Addiction could be an underlying factor in families. It can be an underlying factor, but if you never start, it doesn't kick in. It might show up in another way that you have to deal with in another way, but the trauma is the trigger usually. So the healing all the way around through COVID, through addiction recovery, it has to come from within. I can't provide another person the willingness to have that shift in their identity from the addict to the recovered person. That has to come from within. And that's the choice that has to be free within that person. So, I think that hope for me, I was just going to share a little bit on the hope for me. Hope is a very powerful ingredient. Hope, you want pain and hope. You need pain and hope to recover. That's what needs to happen. I can't stay here anymore, but I don't know where to go. I need the hope. Gives me the direction of where to go. So that's kind of where I see our society, our smaller world of people in recovery, but we're living in a bigger world that's also in a lot of pain right now. It's really easy to use the excuses of the world but that's always been true. Recovery movement came out of the foundations of AA, and that was during the Depression. So they survived world wars, all of that. So there's no reason. It's a decision. It is a decision. What's good? It's a question. What's good about this? What can I do? Where can I focus? Who can I ask for help? It's a decision, and it's a decision to be willing until I get there. Mm-hmm. That's really what it is. And I think that's going to be true for all the way around. But there's a lot of grief in the world. I love talking to you because I always feel lifted up, and I know others do as well. So I'm super excited about our little weekly series. Did you have a question? Did you have a question from one of your folks?
Oh, let me see.
Let's see if we have any questions. People can write their questions in. They can either send them to Kristina or to myself at givingvoicetorecovery at gmail.com, or you can send it to Kristina, and we'll get it on. We'll get your questions in for the next week. We're going to be doing this weekly, so I'm super jazzed.
I know, it's going to be so great. I don't have any questions yet. I think I didn't post it soon enough. But that'll be fun, I think, that for listeners to ask questions, anonymous or otherwise. But I think there's a lot of, like you said, a lot of questions out there, a lot of need for information. Families so often don't know where to go to get it or can't afford it. I mean, that's the other shameful thing in our country is treatment and help is really expensive. Yeah. So it would be great to be able to provide that. So I've loved this, and I'm looking forward to our time for sure.
Absolutely. So
thank you.
So Coffee with Kristina is the name of the new series. It'll be on Giving Voice to Recovery. It'll be on the podcast Giving Voice to Recovery channel, and it will be on the YouTube channel. So I hope you'll subscribe, join, follow us, hang out with us. And down in the bottom, we drink coffee. So that's kind of like our little thing, because I don't know anyone who's gotten into recovery very few people. They become like coffee connoisseurs. The queen of
the truth. That's just so. I didn't even start drinking. I didn't have my first latte till I was like 22 in recovery. So
it's my favorite. It's and it's gone in and out of. It's a bad habit. It's a good habit. It enhances my life. There's no.
I'm so with you.
I love a good cup of coffee. Absolutely.
I'm down. All right, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for having me. And
absolutely.
So I'll see you next week. Yeah.
Next week. And send us your questions. I'll put the email and all of Kristina and my information down in the content below the video and in the podcast. So send us your comments, questions. Let us know what you think. And just so happy to be getting this off the ground, Kristina. I just love you dearly. You're just
such a
pioneer out there.
Thank you.
Helping one at a time and helping people get their lives back.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I have a lot of respect for you as well. So thank you for including me. I'm looking forward to this.
Absolutely. All righty. Take care, my friend.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.